So let's go ahead with the, start the October 23rd Planning Commission meeting. And first item on the agenda is agenda changes. Any changes to the agenda? That's a resounding no. Public comments for non-agenda items? No public, therefore no public comments. Do you want to be now or at other business?
Be real quick.
Okay.
Posters for Water Matters, which is happening November 7th. And it's dealing with what we as private citizens can do with stormwater on our own property. So it's very timely.
Awesome, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. So, let's go ahead with agenda item 3, growth management scoring system for wastewater allocation. So this is continued from our last meeting. When we'd gotten through a good bit.
Yeah, we left off on page 4. You had gotten through the housing needs criterion, and we're about to start talking about the stormwater treatment criterion.
Okay. So actually, Dan and Alex, do either of you have any comments about the scoring system for stormwater, or the criteria before we dive in?
Only that it was, that we talked about lots of different possible criteria, and the group felt stormwater was something that was very pressing and important and being discussed and still being worked out, and that it deserved to give points to projects that did a better job in that regard. And we did talk about trying to go above and beyond the specific treatment standards, and so we started talking about specific stormwater practices, but when we checked in with the state stormwater personnel, they had some good feedback. A couple of our ideas, they said that, that's not going to work, and their suggestion was to go with what we proposed, which talks about extra points for green infrastructure instead of gray infrastructure, and that sort of thing. On-site infiltration. Well, you can see from the point system that's up there. So we did check in with the state, got some suggestions from them. This is what we came up with. It's a similar to the other categories. There's a basic level of points that are just examples only, not meant to be an exhaustive list, but meant to help the DRB calibrate, what level of points you ought to get for what level of above and beyond effort. And then there are bonus points below that. And if you have questions about what Tier 1 removal is, let me know. I can try to explain that.
As I read this, Alex, the Vermont Stormwater Manual is what we will look at to determine things like infiltration. How do we ask developers to document infiltration. I assume we look at the Vermont Stormwater Manual for direction in that.
Yes,
I
so-
don't know the stormwater manual, so that's why I'm asking.
So for example, the highest point example, 15 points, is for projects that infiltrate 75% or more of the stormwater they generate on site. And yeah, it's the storm events are defined in the stormwater manual. We refer back to them. And infiltration it's defined in the stormwater manual. I think that there's enough of a common understanding of that in stormwater design that it's clear, when soils are suitable for infiltration and how much will run off versus be absorbed. Mitch has been educating me on that. The soils have an A, B, C, D classification system, with the A's and the B's being the best infiltration, and they have coefficients, I guess, of infiltration. And so when you're a stormwater designer running this through a modeling program like HydroCAD, you input those values, and it tells you, how much the soil's going to take, how much is going to run off, and it's part of that calculation.
So we're expecting that kind of information to come from a developer to show that they deserve 15 points.
I don't know how else we would do it. I think with Mitch in our quiver as a staff person, we can actually do a little bit of that in-house because he has those skills. But we can't count on having a stormwater engineer, in the planning and zoning office forever. So, yeah, I think it'll be incumbent upon the applicant to demonstrate how they're going to meet that and why they deserve those points. Thankfully, the HydroCAD modeling that most of these stormwater engineers use is pretty plug and play. They put in various numbers and it spits them out. I will say that because we envision this allocation decision to be coming at a sketch plan level of detail for a project, that it's possible an applicant might have to do a little more work than they normally would to get those points, because if they haven't done the modeling, they can't really demonstrate that they're gonna meet that standard.
So you anticipate they could do the modeling even though they're only at sketch plan?
They could.
They could choose to.
They could choose to. Yeah, it would definitely be an additional expense that would be unusual. So it'll be interesting to see if anybody actually goes that far.
If it turns out that they have good water absorbing soils, they may very want to choose that to get 15 points.
Yeah,
as opposed to some of the other things that might be harder for them to accomplish.
That will be the key is having a site that has those kind of soils, which frankly we don't have a lot of in the village growth area or in the sewer service area.
I suspect
I'm
they're
asking
probably
that.
trying to avoid these bonuses if they can get their bonuses somewhere else.
Yeah.
So,
It almost seems that they should be expected to do that.
Well, the problem is when you don't have suitable soils, you can't do it. It's impossible to get the water into the ground because there's that clay layer that just says, nope, it's going to stay on top.
And we actually recognize that if it's not feasible, you can still get 4 points if you use the standard practice that equal tier 1.
Right. Right.
So at least you can get
That's what
4
the,
points.
That's what the state explained to us, is that they have different tiers of treatment, and they feel like tier 1 treatment are the best treatments that remove the most phosphorus and nutrients and sediment. And that's what they push designers to use. But those tier 1 treatments do require suitable soils. And so what the state recommended was, if you've got soils that aren't quite going to work like that, but you can demonstrate you're going to have the same efficiency as a tier 1 treatment type, then we should give you some bonuses for that. Infiltration is by far the gold standard. Unfortunately, we don't have gold soils in the village growth area. However, as you can see, the committee also valued highly stormwater treatment systems that are willing to accept stormwater from off the site and help do something with it. So, if Route 116, for example, is not being effectively treated by the state and is rolling off into somebody's property, and they propose a development that will treat their stormwater but also accept some of that and do a better job treating it, then they can get an awful lot of bonus points in this category as well.
So this 15-point bucket says generated by the project during the water quality storm event is defined in the Vermont Stormwater Manual. Is there a
Yep.
particular stormwater quality event?
Yes, so the way stormwater systems are designed, as I understand it, not the expert Mitch is, but the bulk of the pollutants wash off the site in the first inch of rainfall, I guess it is. And so systems are designed to do a very good job capturing and detaining or treating that first flush of stormwater. And then if it's a much larger storm, it's a 50-year storm event, it's 4 inches of rain in 24 hours. The rain that's hitting after that first flush just has less pollutants, and they don't require they don't require a system that's going to treat it the way they do storms that account for 90% of the storms we see in a year are storms that are below the water quality storm event. I believe it's an inch, Joe.
Okay, so the quote-unquote water quality storm event is some amount of inches of rain is defined in the...
Yes. Yep.
All right.
Are our regulations tighter than the Vermont Stormwater Manual?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's why under 0 points, we say if your project simply meets the Vermont Stormwater Manual and our regs, you don't get any bonus points because you have to do that anyway. And our regs have, I think, 4 special provisions that go beyond what's in the stormwater manual. So projects have to meet the state manual and our 4 special provisions. Our trigger is also lower than the state's. That's probably the more significant difference. Not so much our special Hinesburg only standards, but the fact that the state only requires a permit and requires a design to meet their standards if there is an acre of impervious surface. And we drop that to essentially a 1/4 acre. Right. So our regulations capture a lot more smaller and medium-sized developments that would never go through a state stormwater permit process.
So a single house may set it off.
A single house
on a 1/4 acre site.
A single house did. The first one that triggered that was a new house that was built on Sherman Hollow Road. Hergenrother, Adam Hergenrother is a real estate developer. Actually, he's he owns BlackRock Construction. And he built a house, a very nice house, on Sherman Hollow Road. And the driveway was so long that the zoning permit anticipated both the house and the driveway and triggered it was the first single family home on an existing lot that triggered the regs. And he knows how to do that work, so we got a full stormwater design and went back and forth on it and finally got approved.
Was that happening at sketch plan?
No, so this was an existing lot that didn't have to go through any
Didn't go
review.
through sketch
All it
plan,
needed was a
right.
zoning permit. But the way you wrote these stormwater regs, they apply to projects that are going through the DRB and projects that just require a zoning permit.
We're already
Yeah.
approved lot, okay.
But yeah, it's the driveway on those kind of single-family home lots that tends to
Sets
trigger it.
Set it off, okay.
Ralph, do you want to comment on the comment?
Well, I think I talked about that last time a little bit.
Okay.
You didn't have a comment, I don't think, on this criteria. You had an odd formatting vertical thing, and then I think your next comment was on the village proximity and redevelopment criteria, which is the next one.
Yeah, that's true. Sorry about that.
Do you see one, Barbara, that I'm
I was
missing?
experimenting.
Now, there's one that read,
Yeah, the one you're
Up
pointing
and
to,
down.
Barbara, is right at the end of the stormwater section.
Yeah.
And it says, I would up this to 15 or 20 points and include design quality. I think that comment is related to the next criteria, the village proximity and redevelopment.
Except that I think I said that it affects this category. I just felt that, 25 points in number 1 for infrastructure issues. I understand the sort of special nature of, our attention on stormwater. But by my looking at it, I thought stormwater and infrastructure was the same thing. And that stormwater, as opposed to being a separate category with quite as many points, or I don't know, you could keep the number of points. I just felt that there was nothing in any of these that really dealt with design quality. And so village proximity and redevelopment was the category that I thought that might fall in most effectively. And I thought, as opposed to just 10 points, that ought to be increased, and maybe we decrease the number of points allocated to stormwater and infrastructure slightly. Because when you combine those, that's 45 points. That was just, on my, wasn't like gospel or anything. It was just a suggestion.
so you're thinking that there might be points assigned for doing the same thing in both those categories?
I'm not sure I understand.
You could say under infrastructure, it doesn't include stormwater.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to lump stormwater treatment with infrastructure. Not have it as a separate
And not have
category.
it as a separate category at
Right,
all.
right.
Yeah, we talked
Still
about this-
aspire to all the same things that are
Right,
being
right, right.
discussed in the
That's in
stormwater
stormwater.
category. I just felt, I don't know, are these points, when you total them all up, are they intended to total 100?
At this, yes, they don't have
There's
to, but
nothing that
that's
I
the,
guess says that you couldn't up one of these categories
oh, sure.
and leave everything the way it is.
Right, it doesn't have to add up to 100, could add up to 120.
I think when I read it for the first time, I thought, oh, the magic number is 100, and, from all my high school years.
Right. I think we talked a little bit at the last meeting about the idea of whether the stormwater category is doing the same thing as the public infrastructure category. And
Right.
what I was trying to argue is it's not. It's stormwater infrastructure is very likely, most likely in this town is going to be privately owned and maintained,
Right.
in perpetuity.
Yep.
And it's not public infrastructure. It's private infrastructure. But we want to incentivize the best kind of stormwater treatment in that private setting.
I agree with Alex. I mean, I think that stormwater deserves to be on its own. I mean, it could be a make or break issue with development potential in this town going forward. I think it needs to be put front and center.
But if you're generally comfortable with the stormwater criterion as the committee drafted it, we could just move to the next one.
Well,
I think your idea of deciding how you want the points to run between these 6 criteria is a good conversation to have at the end of this, because there isn't a lot of magic. Dan can tell you, we tried to prioritize, and these numbers reflect the committee's sort of priorities, but this is a different group of people, and maybe you'd like to have the numbers be a little different.
I would think that some note under public infrastructure that says doesn't include stormwater, which is dealt with separately or something like that, would be a good thing. so
Yeah.
that it Makes clear.
I like the idea of keeping them separate. And Joe's notion of saying infrastructure does not include stormwater treatment.
Well, let's just talk about it at the end. I think that's perfectly fine. Yeah.
Are there any other comments on the stormwater section? Okay, let's move on to the housing.
No, we did housing.
Oh, we did housing. Where
Yeah.
the heck am I? Stormwater. All right.
Village
Oh,
Village
villages. Here we
proximity.
go. All right.
So Ralph, to speak to your concern or suggestion, the committee did talk about construction quality. There was initially some desire to have points accrue to projects that were of a higher quality of construction. And after that was suggested, my memory of it was that there was a lot of talk about how the heck are we gonna figure that out? And, you know, some of these things we're gonna have a little faith in the applicant, and be able to verify pieces of, but that's probably one that we wouldn't be able to verify and, might be ripe for abuse. So we moved away from construction quality. I don't think you were suggesting construction quality. I think you were suggesting design quality and certain features that would, you know, make it a more attractive, functional design. I actually steered the committee away from that because I knew that you were working on design standards, and I figured that those would become requirements in the zoning and not need to be incentivized through the allocation process. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, we'll make sure we get good design, regardless of whether you get, you know, how many points you accrue for your allocation. But that doesn't mean we can't still reemphasize it by putting something like that back in here. I do think one thing we did completely miss, is your comment about giving credit for projects that require renovating and updating. And what we added in here was bonus points if you were, if your project was in an existing structure, which, you know, that makes some sense, and more if it's in a historic structure. But we forgot to include any kind of points for a project that is redeveloping a site. Maybe they're not using the existing structure, but it's a developed site versus greenfield development. And that would certainly add to, I think, what the intent was here, which is to say projects that are in the village core already, closer to everything, are projects we want to incentivize.
But that existing structure probably already has sewer, don't they?
Yeah, this would contemplate reusing it for something that would require additional allocation. So let's say they're taking a house and turning it into a fourplex residentially, or taking a house and turning it into an office for X number of people. Something that would require more allocation.
I mean, with this scoring system, I mean, there are multiple kind of reference points here that are quite spread around the town. Given those points, I mean, what areas that this would apply to wouldn't get at least 4 points by just geographic definition?
Yeah, I wondered about that. I wondered if you've
Let
done a
me
map.
let me show you on a map.
He's done a map.
I actually don't have a pre-done map, but I can pull up the software and show you, hopefully on the fly.
I think I measured from the Citgo station down to Buck Hill Road. That's about a mile. To give you a sense. I may not be right on the money, but I think it's close. So 1320, that's about the middle section. 2,600 square feet. So if you were to develop something, I don't know quite what a focal point is, but.
Well, they define it.
Yeah.
The police station, the post office, the town office, and the Hinesburg Community School. So they're
Yeah, so
Focal
yeah, you
points.
pretty much got it covered.
yeah.
Yep.
It was those points were meant to cover the the northeast and west corners of the village core, and the sort of southern and central portion of the village core. So it was meant to say, this is the village core. If you're close to that, you get points. If you're far away from that, you get fewer points. But I think I can plunk them on a map here and show you what that distance looks like. Because remember, the sewer service area is not just the village growth area. And that's what this conversation was about in our meetings, if I remember right, was the sewer service area goes up the Richmond Road. And so we wanted to incentivize or prioritize projects that were, closer to the core than up there.
And the committee did not include CVU as a focal point.
Correct, because it was not deemed to be in the existing village core. It's sort of on the outskirts of the overall village
Although
growth
the
area.
Sewer and water district passes right by it.
Yep. Yeah. Similarly, Iroquois Manufacturing is, at the tail end of the sewer service area, but not anywhere near the village core.
But we actually do have some potential projects that are close to CVU, also sort of at the edge of the village core, but also right along where the water and sewer lines run. I'm thinking of the Quinn land.
Post office. One end of it would be.
Yep.
And then the other end, CVU. So how do you
How
How do you
say
distinguish that?
One is okay, but the other one isn't.
right?
I think it can always be hard to say where are we gonna draw the line. Everything on this side of the line fits the criteria, everything on the other side doesn't.
So,
Well, you can verify the dimensional thing. I think Joe's right, that the 4 points are a given. Because I don't think any project in the Village Growth District is more than 2,640 feet from those four structures.
From those four places.
So everybody gets 4 points, the way it's written, I think. Because the school is way down at the one end,
Right,
and
the post
I don't
office.
think the police station, it might be 2,640 from, I don't think so.
I'd like to see the map, but I am kind of concerned that you're giving away points.
All right, map coming up. Let me get this a little bit transparent so you can see through the buffer. So I'll try to explain here if you can see. No, that's very washed out. Emilio, I'm gonna hit the lights. I'm sorry, I know that's gonna make your camera thing go crazy. So the village growth area, if I get my cursor up here, is this cyan line. And remember, the water and sewer service area goes well beyond that, up to CVU and then out this way, up the Richmond Road. But this is the village growth area. These are your 4 focal points, and so 1,320 feet, which is a quarter-mile buffer from each of them, is in these little
Fat
bubbles. So,
The whole northern section of the village growth area is not covered.
right.
So that's a quarter.
So most of the Village Northeast District and the Village Northwest District are out of it, and they couldn't get the 8 points. They would get the 4 for sure.
Yeah.
Likewise,
And similarly, the Quinn property would not get the maximum 8 points, but would get the 4. And areas that I can show you what a half a mile, looks like, instead of a quarter mile, to show you what the 4-point area is. But essentially, you're right, the whole village growth area would be eligible for at least 4 points. This portion would be eligible for 8. And those areas up the Richmond Road would get 0.
I guess I question, we've designated the entire area the village growth area. Which means we're looking for greater density in the village growth area. So, and it's not a ton of points, but it seems more a matter of where, yeah, I guess maybe I'd like to hear more about the
committee's thought was that if you're weighing between 2 projects, and one is up near Ballard's Corner, and one is here, next to this building, and all things being equal, we would like to prioritize the one that was here versus the one up there, because it's closer to the existing core and it allows us to grow more organically from the center out instead of from the outside in. You're right, the whole area is designated for growth, but they're trying to recognize that even though the whole area is designated for growth, we still have a nucleus that we are trying to build from, and this is just one way to incentivize projects that start there.
I mean, I can see that. We talked about that goal in terms of phasing before. And I think that's a good goal, to want to, not have kind of satellite communities, have a contiguous community. My biggest issue with this one is that this 4-point area is pretty much everything inside the village growth area and in residential one. So I think it's 3 points. And I would rather, if you really want to do this, I would rather focus on, for lack of any other better radii, a quarter mile, and then just cut it off.
It's an interesting point.
Maybe give 5 points for within a quarter mile, and that's your max. Maybe get some bonus points for redevelopment or something like that, but basically take a little weight off this section and do it by not giving free points to the whole growth zone.
I think I remember too when we were talking about this, part of having the whole village growth area get at least 4 points is we were still encouraging development to happen within the village growth area and not trying to push projects outside of that.
Yeah, but there's already, there's already incentive to build in that area. There are higher densities, right, in this area than there would be along the Richmond Road. So that's an incentive in itself to want to build it.
Yeah, it's really more about the competition factor of if you had 2 projects, one on the Richmond Road, one on the Quinn property, that scored equally, but one is closer. Do you want to give some more points for the project that's closer to the center of things, or do you want to give them both nothing because they're not? Neither one is
Depends on which
close
project
enough.
was the better project.
Right, and so this is just one factor among many.
The other criteria would affect those kind of
I'd get
projects.
rid of this one altogether, but that's my opinion. I don't,
You know,
I mean, there are horses already out of the barn on these projects. They're already started.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what you're gonna really,
Maybe.
I don't know.
I mean, maybe things change, right? I mean,
Or just keep the bonus points part of it. because they're actually reusing something that exists.
You know, I've been a proponent of phasing from near the village outward, right? So this is a tool to do that in some respects, if, you know, if the,
I mean, I think they're already gonna
So-
have to do that because I don't believe there's enough sewer allocation to do the whole project.
well, agreed, but,
Right.
but
This
if
isn't
you,
designed to force people to do anything.
Right.
This is designed to prioritize and incentivize people to do development closer to the center of things. So we're not, yeah, the whole area is zoned for growth. It's all got to provide the necessary infrastructure to be connected. But we have allocation, and when we dole it out in a competitive environment, we can add some additional layers of incentive or priority. But that's fine. If you want to reduce this or do away with it or reshape it, that's why we're talking about it. I do think that Ralph's suggestion, though, about developing some level of points for the redevelopment of sites that already have some level of development on them, it would be a valuable addition. Like, for example, if somebody came in and said,
Like where Tailhook
who do
is
I
or
want to
something
pick
like
on?
that.
Yes, let's pick on Tailhook because they've talked about maybe relocating. So let's say somebody came in and said, that's a perfect lot for me, but I really got to knock that building down and start over. But I'm going to do that, and I'm going to make that investment. I think that's a really, really positive thing that deserves points over and above a project like Haystack Crossing, which is a great project, but is completely greenfield development and you know is going to remake a site, but it's a site that's starting from an agricultural field versus these developed sites that oftentimes can have some additional hurdles, whether they're potential brownfield issues or what have you. So the more we can incentivize redevelopment of existing property, I think we ought to give points for that.
We could do it in this section, as Joe suggested, just points for, what was it, a quarter mile, and then points for, and having it be additive, but a larger amount of points for brownfield or infill or whatever redevelopment.
How would the quarter mile be measured, Joe? How do you, from these 4 points?
Yep.
I guess, when I first read this, I struggled with a police station, but then again, there's some other things co-located around there. You know, I hope most people don't walk to the police station, but hopefully people will walk to the park next door.
I brought a lost dog there the other day. I mean, you know, fortunately,
walked
walked within 1,320 feet of where I was. You know,
Thank God for that.
You were able to walk?
I was tugging on that dog, I'll tell you.
Now, maybe you wanna use a rocking chair up front or something. So, yeah, but,
Anything.
yeah, I'm okay with the points chosen. I just, I was scratching my head on the 1.5 mile.
We did steal this idea from the town of Williston scoring system. They have a similar distance point, bonus point, or not bonus point, but distance scoring criteria. Ours is tweaked a bit. It's not quite like theirs, but it's similar, quarter mile, half mile to.
From certain points in Williston?
Yeah, I forget exactly.
What points are they? I'd be interested to know what
Me
their
too.
points are.
Let me look. I have it on the computer here.
I
Let me
would
look.
like to see that.
What they define as their points.
Right.
Walmart,
I got smart girls.
Yeah.
I just- It was low hanging fruit.
We picking on Williston? Is that
Yes.
Always.
This is the portion of the meeting where we pick on Williston.
Just-
Or any other town that you like.
All right.
I would expect town hall, town administration office.
Yeah,
But you know, if I think where most of the development's going on, it's far away from that, so there must be
exactly.
some other point. If people are actually using this, maybe
What
they're
do they
not.
consider their
Maybe
center
they're not
town?
getting points from that
Where
at
is
all.
their,
Oh,
is there
friendly?
septic system on the
Chili.
road back to here? Where is the septic system in? Yeah, it doesn't
In
matter.
Williston?
In Williston?
It's in Essex Junction.
Oh.
They don't
but
have
what
it-
is that? There's something on Oak Hill Road, or I don't know what you call it in
I
Williston.
don't know what that is. I've always
It's
wanted to know what that
Something to do with
is.
septic, I've been told.
It's not a municipal system.
Really?
Because they
I thought it was.
they pipe all their stuff to Essex Junction. But I know
Really?
exactly what you're talking about. I've
Yeah.
always wondered what that was, and I've never asked.
Yeah, near Thomas Chittenden.
Exactly, right near Thomas Chittenden.
It's like a pump station.
Yeah, I
Oh,
think so.
I mean, it probably is just a pump
It may be
station
just
to
that.
deal with
Yeah, it
topography,
is,
but
probably.
But I didn't realize it went to Essex. That's interesting.
All right, so maybe I can't tell you. It's it says that their criteria is called build close to services. Williston encourages new residential development within walking distance of focal points in the growth center or village. There must be safe pedestrian way from the units for which points are awarded. Blah, blah, blah. If proposed units are within 1,310 feet of a focal point in the growth center of the village, you get 10 points. If they're within 2,640 feet, you get 5 points. Other units further away get 0. And then it says, what is a focal point? Focal points are public gathering places, formal or informal. They are currently identified in the town's vision for its growth center as set forth in the town's application for state growth center designation.
Clear.
This will be incorporated into the town plan. So if I
not like
dug
we're
further into
thinking.
their town plan, I think we'd see where those focal
Yeah.
points were, but I don't know exactly where they
I think
are.
it's a little different than the way we're thinking with
Gazebo
Hinesburg.
by the
Yeah.
library.
Don't you?
Maple Tree Place Center.
In any case, back here, it sounds like, Joe, you're cool to this half a mile distance getting any points.
Yeah.
And Dennis, you're kind of cool to this whole thing to begin with, so less is more, I would assume, if we were to shrink this a
I
bit.
mean, the developer's developing there because he's got the space to develop. It's not because he's close to Hinesburg Elementary School.
Right, no, again, this is a way to give more benefit to projects that choose to do development closer to the center of things. So if developer A
He's
does have,
choosing to because he's got the space to do it.
Yeah, where within this red zone that
So
you
why
had
should you
all
get-
4 of those, where are they going to find
Would
a
mostly be,
large area to develop?
right, it would be
They're not.
mostly
It's not
redevelopment
there.
or
well, the lot
behind
15 in
here.
Commerce Park, where Hannaford's proposed
That's
is
not very
4.5
big.
acres of prime real estate with a lot of constraints, but
But not, that cannot be developed.
the Lyman property behind Kinney Drugs is not yet developed.
Right.
There's a proposal
What-
for it.
In Redstone?
That's it. Yeah, the cheese
That's the only one I
plant,
can think of.
the cheese plant
It's
has
sizable.
vacant property where the parking lot is now.
But they're
So
close
that's
to,
redevelopment.
I think it was more
Right.
redeveloped, well, they do have some land that's not been developed.
Yeah, they have land that is
Brownfield, right? Is that called brownfield?
doesn't have structures on it. But yeah, the properties that have the most potential for greenfield development are the Haystack Crossing property, the Blumstrom property, and the Quinn property. And those are outside of that quarter
Those
mile
are all
radius.
outside.
Right,
The way I
so the
was-
rest is more redevelopment.
I mean, we could just incentivize brownfields development.
We'd actually, I don't think we have a lot of brownfields. I think we
or
have-
just that plus redevelopment.
Yeah, I think we'd wanna give folks some incentive for redevelopment of any sort
Yeah.
if it involves some criteria, like an existing structure or
Right.
existing improvement, something that's not just a green field, planting stuff in a green field.
So maybe that would be, in a way, just as or more effective than incentivizing by distance.
Right.
Perhaps.
I mean, the one thing I think about with distancing, you know, I'm going back to earlier conversations, you know, water, wastewater, limited resource. What happens if we didn't really expand, right? We wouldn't be able to have all the development that we actually zone for in Village Northwest, Village Northeast, et cetera. And, you know, if that was the case, where would we want people to develop where they could, right? Not create these long-term little satellites, you know, with lots of space in between them. And, you know, we were talking about it in terms of phasing it and making sure that when we, do something, if you grant an approval, make sure that you do the inner stuff first and you can do the outer stuff next, and et cetera. I mean, this is potentially another tool to do that, and that's why I don't have a problem with, looking at very small radii around these focal points and giving some incentive there. It's like phasing, which we don't have in our regs today.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about this northeast corner that's not included in these focal points. There's a bank, there's a library, there's a restaurant, a new
school.
restaurant, there's a gas station, there's a medical office.
Right.
All of that's clustered right up there in that northwest corner.
Yep.
And yet,
I'm gonna
it's
get in trouble.
outside,
It's a
getting
settlement.
any,
Yeah, it is a it is a
It's a
satellite.
settlement, which you don't like.
I'm gonna get into trouble. I mean, frankly, right, that was not the right place to put, right, a medical business right there.
Right, but it's there now.
But it's there, it's starting that satellite thing, right, because we didn't think about this, or I didn't think about this, right?
Why is it not a good spot?
yeah.
It's a settlement, it's
we're-
not
We're
close to
proposing
the
to
main-
allow the village to grow there, so it will no longer, 20 years from now, it won't be a
Maybe,
satellite.
but in the case of scarce resources, you may never get there, right? This board has talked many times about trying to develop from the center of the village outward, right? And providing a contiguous, developed area. How many times have different people talked about the library and it being a great library in the wrong place? Because it's far away. Well, the health center isn't really any different than the
It's far away
library.
from some people, but not far away from others.
It's a
No, it's-
very vibrant area.
Hinesburg's more than just the village.
Right.
Hinesburg is more than just a village.
I mean, it's close to me.
If we're
library.
talking
But you
about
still-
areas that
But you
people
still have to
use.
drive there.
I think
You wouldn't have to.
I think
You
what
could
Joe's
walk
saying is
there.
that
You could walk,
very few
absolutely.
people can
I
walk
walk
to
along
the
116
can walk to the
a little bit.
library
You
where it is
can.
now.
To get between Newton's, where I park the car, and where I take care of the tombstone. And I'm in fear of my life,
But
carrying
Dennis
equipment
could
down
walk through his property and get there and jump off the.
Right. It's not about which person can walk there. It's about how many people can walk
But,
there. Vastly more people
people
could
do
walk there
walk
if
a
it
lot
was
around.
located closer to the center of where all the development is today. It's true, like John said, in the future, we may have more people living in that northwest quadrant than we have living in the rest of the
Hey, we've been
in the
pushing on
southern
that.
part of the
We got a
village.
developer wanting to do that.
And there is a lot of walking, I will tell you, between CVU and down to there, because I go to that bank at least once a day, and
Yeah.
I go and get my
On
gas there.
CVU
I'm
Road,
going to Ballard.
There is a
It's
lot
busy.
of people walking. And the bank,
Well, anyways, John, your point was why are we not
Identifying a
incentivizing
focal point up
there,
there. Is that what
like
you're
at the
getting at?
library, for example?
yeah.
Yeah, the reason is that is in the explanatory paragraph for this section, and that is that points are awarded for projects that are proximate to the existing village core as defined in the town plan. And the town plan does talk about the fact that this village has an existing village core that is centered on this building. And then we have a larger village growth area that we are growing into, the Ballard's Corner area of which is at the very edge of.
which is
That's
like
all.
Williston, more back to what you were talking about Williston. The way they
Well,
describe.
that's true. Their focal points
Their
include
focal
both
points.
their growth center, which is
Right.
around Taft's Corners, and
Right.
their village, even though
Exactly.
they're in two very different places. But
Just
in any
saying.
case, that was why it was written that way. Was trying to parrot the town plan's distinction between what is our village core area and what is our larger growth area.
Well, I guess from where I sit, I do believe, pretty strongly that whether those are the right focal points, there's no denying, I guess, if I were to back up, that CVU and all the stuff that gets generated from it, we may not call it a focal point, but it is a focal point.
Right.
So that goes against what I'm about to say, which is that you know, I think moving outward from the core of the village, the historic village and, you know, some of what's north of it currently, you know, I think ought to be a priority and expressed in this allocation system in some way. I don't think maybe the way it's put right now maybe mimics Williston a little too much.
Maybe there's a different way to do it, Ralph. Maybe maybe it could be done by zoning district. I mean, we borrow this from Williston, but our zoning districts are pretty clearly defined. If we were to say that these bonuses accrued to projects in the village zoning district, the commercial zoning district, which would include Ballards, as well as the Commerce Park area, those are both commercial districts, as well as the two industrial districts for the Cheese Plant and the Giroux properties, that would cover the existing village core, and then that would exclude the village northwest, northeast, residential 1, residential 2.
Well, it does also cover this whole idea of either redeveloping a site that has a structure on it, or redeveloping a site that's potentially, you know, substantially underutilized. I think the point should also frankly address this phasing issue, you know, and the fact that just sort of leapfrogging all the time is a poor use of our community's resources, even if somebody else is paying for it, you know. So I think maybe the way you just said it deserves examination, but I think the phasing piece and the reuse of existing buildings or redevelopment of existing buildings or sites that are underutilized, I think that gets more to the heart of what this point system here, at least within this category. I mean, I had phasing, redevelopment of existing sites and outbuildings, and existing buildings, and I guess I'd change design quality to design innovation, because whether it belongs in this category, I don't know. You know, beats me. But I guess.
So if we added phasing, I'm assuming that would apply principally to these growth districts, the Village Northwest, Northeast, Residential 1 on Mechanicsville Road, as opposed to the Village District and the Commercial District, which are largely built out, and there's not a whole lot to worry about in terms of phasing, because we're, you know, the only place that has substantial development potential is that's greenfield development, is the area west of Kenny Drugs.
Yeah, within the existing core. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
So could
to a
we?
large degree you're right.
So
I think the
would the
Quinn property isn't, you know, in terms of just greenfield, large substantial areas of greenfield within the village growth area. It's really northwest, northeast, and the Quinn property.
So we could establish a separate set of points for those three zoning districts that gives extra points for projects in those districts that build proximate to these focal areas or proximate to some other geographic thing that we could define, the village district or something like that.
I'd almost want to I mean, for phasing, I would kind of want it to be stronger, like disincentivize building
Scattered
islands. I mean, just a few points for building proximate. I'm not sure that's.
Well, the way
You give minus points.
we haven't we haven't
Attention.
yeah we didn't contemplate negative points. The point system certainly could include takeaways in that regard. Could include negative points, but the committee didn't contemplate that. I don't think Williston's system had it, so we didn't really think of it. But we thought that the way you do that is rather than negative points for stuff you don't like, just lots more points for what you do like. It's a positive thing. So instead of saying, well, you get 1 bonus point if you phase it so that your first phase is closer to the center of things, we'll give 10, or give a large number of points. So then there's a real incentive to do that. And that speaks to Rolf's point of maybe increasing the bandwidth of this criteria. Right now, it's limited to 10 points maximum. if it were bolstered to 15 or even 20, you'd have more room in there to say, do this, and you're really going to get priority for allocation. Remember, that's all this discussion is encouraging a developer to want to get to the front of the line for allocation.
And it's all assuming there's gonna be a line.
And right, if there's no line, then it's not necessarily going to matter much. But I will say, the more that we, through whatever vehicles we use, regulatory, revolving loan fund incentives, allocation programs, the more we say what we want and say it clearly, the more likely folks are going to come and want to deliver that. BlackRock is a really good example of that. We've just received their preliminary plat application, and I've finally been looking at it in the last couple days. And what they have in their narrative, what they have pulled right out of our regulations and said, you said you wanted this and we're going to do that. Or you said you want this and you're going to give us a bonus, it's remarkable. So I think it's good to say what we want, even if we might not have competition in year 2. And, the developer could be saying, I don't have to do anything and just need to get the minimum score because I know no one else is coming in. I'm not sure that it'll work quite like that. I think they might look at what we're saying and be like, I can deliver, 4 out of those 10 things. I'm going to play that up. Well, in any case, I've got adding points for redevelopment or infill of underutilized spaces. I've got, per Joe's suggestion, narrowing this distance measure for points, or just eliminating it altogether and having it be tied to the village core zoning districts, which would address John's point about getting some points if you're developing in Ballards, as well as down in the core. And holding on to some points for reuse of existing structures as is proposed. And then I'm just not clear on how you want to do this last one we just talked about, this phasing thing for projects outside of the core. I mean, the simplest way is to incentivize, that the project be phased so that the first areas developed are proximate to existing development.
And if nothing ever got built again, it would look fine.
Right. Yes, we could write that in as well. That if future phases were not to happen, the project would be a seamless, expansion of the village and not a satellite.
I like that better than existing development, because that kind of says growth from both sides, given where we are today.
So on the Prague property on the east side of Mechanicsville, that big piece, we're suggesting that they develop at the southern end of that,
The Quinn property.
that their first phase is toward the south end of that entire
That would be the
parcel. That's
implication.
what-
They would get more points if they develop that south side versus
all
the
way
north
up
side.
by the cemetery.
Which frankly, on that property, it's the north side that has the best development potential, but
On the the east side of the road?
yeah,
Oh, really?
The most ticks.
that too.
But they haven't even come in about that. We're talking
No.
about the other one, which is,
Well, that means we can be ahead of it
that's right.
if they haven't
I
come
know.
in.
Yeah, on the
True.
on the west side, the property that sold to the new property owners, they are looking
Starting on
to
the south
develop
end.
on the south side,
Yeah.
and we would, if
Yeah,
this
what
were in
John
place,
said.
we would be
That
able
would be
to
consistent.
Yes.
incentivize that. Yeah.
Yes. So it all
Well,
makes
if you want me to write something up along those lines, I can take a crack at it. Unless somebody has a better way to get after this idea of phasing for these growth area districts, Village Northwest, Northeast, and Residential 1.
I like it.
I take a crack at it.
Yeah, I'd say go with that.
Okay.
Remind me again how much of the Chaprad property is,
Quinn.
not the Chaprad, the Quinn property is RR1. There's a dividing line in
So,
there.
so you can, John's question was, how much of the Quinn property on the east side of Mechanicsville Road, right up here?
Yeah.
How much of that is in the RR1 versus the R1? In other words, how much is in the village growth
Right.
area?
Right.
The Quinn property, I'm drawing it right now, extends all the way over here.
Right.
So is that our?
And this blue line, or cyan line,
Yeah.
that's the zoning district line.
That is the zoning district.
Yeah, so this portion that's in the open meadow portion and just the edge of the woods around it is in the growth area. And all of this back here, probably 65% of it is in the rural residential one, outside of the
Right.
sewer service area,
Right.
outside of the growth area.
Right.
I hate to see that fragmented more with long driveways and.
You know, just as a completely separate point, you guys, I said before that the village was about a mile long. According to this little map, it's almost closer to, well, it's 9,000 linear feet. So it's more like a mile and 3/4.
The linear side of it versus the as the crow flies is important because our village, centers on 116, which makes a turn.
Yeah, I'm measuring along 116.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could get there faster with a drone. Yep.
As the drone flies, as Cindy saying.
That's gonna become an expression. Hell with the birds.
We're gonna shoot them down with the drones, right?
Disappearing anyway.
Right, they're not gonna exist anyway.
Yeah, the GIS system gets
Squirrely.
8,300 feet, linear feet, from
Following 116?
following 116 from the CVU Road intersection to the Buck Hill Road intersection.
That's probably more accurate because I was using the nub of my pen.
It's not a scale pen.
I thought architects had to be precise.
Well, you gotta improvise.
You don't carry your little scale in your pocket all the time with your various colored pens and a plastic protector?
Before
Those are engineers that tend to do that.
before you move past this one and on to the last one, which is energy efficiency, I don't want to discount what you were suggesting about design quality, Rolf. I'm just not quite sure how to put it in here and whether it's necessary if we adopt zoning regs that have all those requirements already. What were you thinking in terms of design quality?
What were you thinking? Yes. Well, I guess, whenever you get into these less objective criteria, something like this starts to get a little squirrely, and I think it's difficult. I'm not saying it's simple. It's just, hey, at the same time, we've been dealing for the past 6, however long, with all these design standards, and the standards are the standards, and my hunch is that there are design quality issues related perhaps more to something you categorize as innovation, where you clearly see some things that are, they could relate to the next category, actually, energy efficiency. But also just, we don't have it out there quite so explicitly. I mean, something comes along that, for whatever reason, I'm not sure what those reasons are, but it's clearly an exemplary project from a design innovation standpoint.
Well, so I think we have a good example of that in the NRG facility, right? I think most people understood that when that facility was designed and built, and as it exists today, it represents a much more innovative,
Above and beyond.
more interesting light industrial building than
A flat box.
than a 20-foot tall Butler building, flat box that's very, that could be designed to be very efficient with lots of insulation, but doesn't have the design quality. So I think that's a good example of one, but I'm not sure how to codify that in a point-based system. So that's why I'm.
Okay.
How might you do that? Because what we can't do is say, we can't describe it, but we know it when we see it. You know, that works in
not.
certain Supreme Court cases for,
Yeah.
you know, historical
Yeah.
purposes, but not so much in a scoring system. But that's not to say there isn't a way
Yeah.
to get after it if you can think of one.
I'll ponder that some more.
Okay.
I've been thinking about it in terms of the design standards that we've been working on. How might we include quality design in those standards
Yeah.
by giving a lot of photographic examples or sketch examples? This is what we're talking about, this kind of thing. And maybe even having some negatives. Don't do this. And be careful about using local examples. I don't want to put somebody's
Right.
building up there saying, we don't want to do this. And, you know,
Right.
and it's.
We have plenty
you
of
know, a
examples from
business-
elsewhere in Chittenden County that are
Right,
both good and bad.
we can get other examples that can not be locationally based and
But
nobody
John, I think what
recognized.
Alex is saying is if you write a good set of design standards, and then someone comes along and meets all of those standards,
Does that produce good design?
well, you know, but assuming it might, how do you then incentivize above and beyond that? You know, what are those criteria above and beyond the standards that we've set in the design quality standards? If somebody comes along and meets all those standards, and presumably,
Then they're
yeah,
approved.
yeah.
It seems like it's really hard to get away from the subjective in that regard.
I think it is.
Without getting into construction specifications, you know. Continue to make their way through the project, through the approval process, and then wait to go to construction. Those are the more difficult ones to decide when they should lose their allocation if they're fully permitted.
Even though we don't have a line now of developers wanting to get an allocation, it might turn out that we do.
We do
And
actually
so
have a
then-
line now.
Right, a short line.
Short line, yep.
Right. So that makes everybody beyond that number one allocation sort of wait until number one is verified that, yes, they can do all these things they said. They've now been able to show that, and they've said they will do it, but that doesn't come during sketch plan. That doesn't come until a later phase. Meanwhile, all the people who are ready to go want to come in, they've already gotten maybe a sketch plan approval, and they're ready to go with the next phase.
Well, they all
That
get
leaves it-
treated equally, right? So they all can compete, and they all get scored similarly. And at least in the Williston model, they don't allow one project to soak up all of their available allocation. There are limits on how much they can allocate in any given year, and then over the span of 10 years. And so we envisioned our program to be somewhat similar, that the select board would look at how much allocation we have total, and then decide how much of that will be available in any given year. And projects may have to get allocation over multiple years in order to satisfy their full build out. But everybody has a bite at the apple, you know.
So the
within-
second person that comes in and gets a sketch plan can go through preliminary, but not have allocation because someone beat them out.
No, so they'd have to wait.
They couldn't finish their project, and then when allocation comes available, they can
Correct.
go.
They couldn't, nope, they would get to sketch, and if they didn't get their allocation, they'd have to wait till the next year to apply for that allocation again, and then they proceed. Now, in Williston, they tend not to have so many applications, that it becomes a major issue. They are able to give out a fair amount of allocation, and an awful lot of projects get some. Now, they may be metered out in time, so they can't, get their permits and then build 100 units in year one, but they have that ability to garner their allocation. With us, it'll depend on how much we're actually gonna have. Right now, we don't have anything, or very little, so it's sort of a moot point. But if this new well that we're working on pans out, then we'll have a substantial amount of water allocation to dole out. But yeah, there's the potential for there to be projects that come forward and we love them and they look good, but another project scored better or got their allocation the year prior, and then they have to wait.
What happens if someone goes through sketch, they end up getting, their allocation based on what they've said at sketch?
Yep.
Then they sit back down for preliminary plat with a DRB, and, the back and forth, community input, this and that, right? The DRB puts, constrictions on the development, right? Such that what comes out of preliminary plat wasn't what went into sketch. It may actually violate some of the things, may actually take back some of the things that were promised to get the allocation, so.
So this is why the committee felt that it's the DRB that should be in charge of scoring and granting the allocation and not the select board, because then it's the same board who saw the project, understood what it was going to deliver, how it scored, that is then looking at the preliminary plat application later saying, we gave you a green light for a a conceptual level project, and we're going to try to hold that.
Right, but yeah, okay. It's just that by the time the review process goes down the road, you may have more people in. You're getting, maybe it's pushback, maybe it's approval, whatever, right? Things can happen, projects can change. If project could end up getting approved, but what got approved at sketch isn't what got approved at preliminary plat. So, and if they're different, what do you do with the allocation?
The way we contemplated, you would do nothing. In other words,
So,
as long as the project was substantively the same as what it got approval under, and it continued to follow through the DRB process, you just have to be okay with
so if I
that.
promise so many jobs, right, at sketch, and I actually got approved for less commercial, so it's fewer jobs, and it's a lower category, of bonus or not any bonus at all, we just go
You're
forward.
definitely gonna have that problem.
Yeah, we might, and I think
Because I've
we
seen some of these sketches come, well, you've seen it.
I think
They
we've
come in
talked
way
about
different.
we talked about it in a couple of ways. We talked about a clawback provision that says if you're substantially different from what you promised, then you lose the allocation and you start over. And then we talked about the reality, which is if the DRB is managing the process and the DRB is
Right.
tweaking the project, that's not the applicant's fault.
right.
And they ought to just be able to continue through the
Right,
process.
if it's the applicant's decision to change something, then it's on the
Yeah.
applicant. If it's the DRB process, right, then I think that has to be dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the answer. God, glad I'm getting off.
It's usually the developer that changes their,
Yeah, the DRB doesn't, well, you
either they
provide
change, they're
some-
gonna put in senior housing, but the market doesn't say
Allow
they
it.
Yeah,
can, so they're
like-
gonna put houses in instead.
Right. Well, and so we did talk about some examples, that one in particular, where we thought that a clawback provision should be enforced, right? So if the developer, that's a good example, because we had one that happened like
Right,
that in
right,
Thistle
right.
Hill. If the developer says, I'm gonna do 32 units of senior housing, and I'm getting a bonus, as part of that, and then they come back later and say, I want to
can't do
revise
it.
the project because I can't do the senior housing, the market doesn't exist, or I can't get another, I'm not equipped to do that, then we say, that's fine, but you lose your allocation and you got to come back and start over.
Which they did,
And that
right?
means they then have a hole in their project and they have to go back to, go back through the allocation process to try to fill that hole.
Is there do you think there's resistance from the select board to go the direction that you're talking about? Or is that maybe gonna happen?
With clawbacks, you mean?
No, with the DRB being in charge of this allocation rather than the
No,
select board?
they haven't given their final approval
No,
to
but they
anything yet. They want to see what happens in
Right.
your process. But no, initially they thought that made sense, and they
Yeah,
were
I
willing
do
to
too.
let that responsibility go.
Right.
They'll still be in charge on an annual basis of understanding what's available
Right.
and putting it in a couple of different buckets.
Yeah.
One of those buckets would be for the DRB to give out. Some of those buckets might be for projects that are exempt from that scoring system,
Right.
the smaller projects and the like.
Who deals with the phasing The select board or the DRB in terms of reviewing, yeah, your phasing is acceptable.
DRB, under the new system, it would be
It
wholly
would
the
be
DRB.
All the DRB.
Yeah, right now, it's a little bit of both,
Yeah.
because of the allocation process is managed by the select board. But the way we've written the ordinances now, the select board is supposed to sort of like look at what the DRB does and try to make sure their allocation syncs up with that if the DRB has any kind of desires on phasing. So this would eliminate that two-board issue and just put the power in the hands of the DRB to figure that all out as a part of the review.
Well, unfortunately, it looks like we're not gonna finish tonight. We just have one section, but, we're,
Can I ask a favor?
yes?
So I'm a little embarrassed, although we're not finishing, so it's not a big deal, I guess. If you read this, you saw that the Energy Committee helped us with this last criteria, and that they proposed a system for giving points for renewable technology use, but it says sort of ... need to flesh this out more with Chuck
Right.
Reese, and I meant to call him in advance of this meeting and say, Chuck, we never figured that out. Can you help me figure? Would one of you who's interested in renewable energy technologies be willing to contact Chuck and see if he can squeeze that information out of him? He had something that sounded like an associate of his had developed a proprietary system for scoring, and that person had indicated they'd be willing to let us sort of use it. But that's as much as I know about it. And I just have a full plate coming up. So if somebody else were willing to sort of interface with Chuck and see if they could get that information out of him, that would be very much appreciated.
I'll call him.
All right, Rolf is on it.
Thank you, Ralph.
And you saw what I sent you today about the vehicle charging station?
Yes.
Trying to draw Chuck into that also as
Yep.
part of the Energy Committee.
Yep, I replied to your email, so
Okay,
check
I
that
just
out.
haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, I did it just late in today.
Okay, so do we have enough time to talk about the fiscal year projects? or-
We should, because
Yeah.
I gotta actually prepare the budget and give it to my boss next
All right.
week. Although you meet next week, so we could talk about it then too, but it'd be better to talk about it now briefly.
Yeah,
So, it's budget time, as you probably all know, and the select board will be spending a good deal of time in November and December and January, hearing from department heads and other groups that, you know, have a part of the budget process. This is what voters will be voting on at town meeting for the municipal budget. So in the planning and zoning budget is a very simple budget. We're like a lot of our departments, most of our expenses are wrapped up in personnel. But each year we take the special projects line item and we talk about what we might want to do with it in the next fiscal year. And for the last several years, my pitch to the select board has been, we should at least have enough in that line item to cover the maximum required local match for the municipal planning grant program, and that we have a decent amount to cover local match for the regional planning commission's annual work program, where they solicit the towns and say, what projects do you want to do, how can we help? And they require, I think it's a 20% match for them. And so in the last several years, it's been $2,000 for municipal planning grant will get you the maximum. They have a 10% match and their maximum grant is like $22,000. So about $2,000 will get you leverage the full amount of that grant. And it depends on what the project might be for the regional planning commission, but somewhere in the $4,000 to $6,000 range for those. Often those are transportation related, so a scoping
That's the
study.
town's share-
That would be the
town's
town share, yep. So that's the ballpark that we're in. This year, for example, I think we have $8,000 in the special projects line item, and that's going towards our municipal planning grant application that we filed this year for the help with the graphics for the design standards. And it's also going for the Richmond Road, Texas Hill Road, North Road intersection redesign. So there's local match, 6,000 in local match for that. So those are the two projects we're doing this year, about 8,000 that line item. the question is, long preamble, what do you want to do in the next fiscal year? What projects do we see on the horizon that would help inform this particular line item in the budget? Because, for example, if you wanted to pursue the fiscal analysis that we also talked about for a municipal planning grant, but the select board opted to go with the other idea, yeah, some of the ballpark cost estimates for that were $50,000 to $75,000. And I guarantee you the select board will not approve a $50,000 to $75,000 line item for that. But if we wanted to include some for local match and try to go find a funding source, we might want to include, a 10% of that. So $500 to $7,500. And if we also want to apply for a different kind of municipal planning grant in the next year, then that's $2,000. So it helps to talk about what kinds of projects you might like to pursue. And that's why I forwarded you a couple of ideas. One of them was the fiscal analysis, one of which was the stormwater analysis that Kate and Bob and Mag from the Conservation Commission had recommended. And we talked about input to the DRB on that, but we also talked about, well, maybe the town should just do that. And so that's an idea as well. Those were the two I mentioned in my email to you, but then I sent you the Planning Commission's action item list from the town plan. If there are any items in there that you see that we're supposed to be working on, we could think about those as well. So last bit, I don't expect you to give me a dollar amount. That would be ridiculous. I just wanted to get your input on the kinds of projects you want to potentially work on over the next 18 months. And we know what projects we're currently embroiled with, and those are going to take us right through the rest of this fiscal year. So this allocation scoring system, the design standards work, we'll blow the rest of the fiscal year right through June 30th on those two. So think beyond those two. What would you like to be doing, say, in July through the next fiscal year for the next project?
We haven't looked at R1 in how long?
Yes, on the list of projects that were started but then never finished, we have RR1 district rezoning, shoreline district rezoning.
Touched that one once before, didn't you, and then dropped it?
Yeah, but then the
Both of those
state,
we touched before and dropped, yeah, put on a shelf, I would say. We didn't
Well,
really drop them, but,
Only for the time being.
and we also talked about a comprehensive regulation overhaul where we applied for a municipal planning grant that we didn't get for like a $40,000 project to do.
the
soup
thing
to
is,
nuts.
do we keep applying for that?
No, I think there's a good chance we won't get it unless we, talk about it in a different way. It's tied to some other facet.
Can we ask for an install, I'm thinking of the right word here. I mean, if it's $40,000, then well, the select board's not gonna give us that in 1 year either, but if we said, we want X amount, over, the next 3 years or 5 years to put in, to fund what we think is gonna be a $50,000 effort to redo your
Yes.
zoning bylaws.
And in fact, that, we do capital transfers
Yeah.
out of each annual budget where we say, it's in the budget, we're gonna spend it, but we're giving it to ourselves in a piggy bank.
Right.
And we were doing that for the comprehensive zoning overhaul. We were saving $3,000 a year over, I think it was 3 years, to build up a kitty to have a larger local match for the grant that we went for. And we could do that again. We could recommend doing that again.
That would be my recommendation, is if you don't think we're gonna get a grant for that, then we need to continue to save, because I think this board thinks, pretty much in agreement that it's a good idea, it's a needed thing, we're suffering from bloat.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's a really good suggestion, because that had slipped off my radar, kind of got discouraged that we weren't gonna get to do it at all, but if we start saving,
It's
We
either
could.
that or Maggie pulls out her red pen and just starts to.
write checks.
Start writing checks.
Oh, you mean a red pen with the regulations? I thought you meant a pen to write a big fat check to
No.
fund the,
No,
yeah. All right, that's a good idea,
you
good
could buy a lottery
suggestion.
ticket if you want, but
pass the hat.
So does
Crazy.
that mean you dropped the idea of R1 in the shoreline district, or?
No,
Well,
I think Joe's suggestion
that's a
is,
money thing.
let's start saving some for a couple of these bigger projects,
Right.
like the fiscal
Right.
analysis that's very expensive, like the zoning overhaul that's very expensive. But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean we can't also propose money to do, a more doable project in the short term, like R1 or something else.
Well, I would think the commission can deal with R1 or shoreline, increase the bloat, and then let somebody else,
I
make
just,
sense of it.
we've looked at a lot of, or you've looked at a lot of other areas, maybe, why not continue on?
Yeah.
Even though there's still blow.
Yeah,
That's what I was just
Yeah.
thinking. Because the others have somewhat been reviewed, and
Yes, I think we've done
those two haven't.
we've done a pretty comprehensive look
Right.
at the village, and it seems like we'll never stop doing that. It seems like
Right,
a never-ending
that's what I'm
thing.
going
And we
with.
did that really intensive rezoning of the rural
Right.
RR2 and ag, but yeah, we just haven't had the time to get back to RR1.
Yep.
Well, it certainly, even if we can largely do that with in-house resources, I think it's a good idea to, if that's a project that you want to work on in the next fiscal year potentially, it's still a good idea to budget some money to help leverage a grant to help us with that. Just like when we got to these design standards and realized we need an illustrator, we need somebody to help us a little bit, and that costs money. It's possible that could pop up when it would work on the RR1 district. But what else you got for projects? Don't feel constrained by everything we've already talked about. Maybe you have a new idea that you think the town should be taking action on. Or something you saw in the town plan that,
I don't understand how this might fit in, but there was recently, I think on the town website, a statement about how the revolving loan fund is all ready to go. We need to get some applicants to start loaning that money out.
Yep,
I went back and looked at the Economic Development Committee's work. The last time they posted anything online was November 17th, 2016.
yep.
Where are they?
So they've gone
Can
on,
they help with this effort of bringing jobs to town, for example?
yeah, so actually what happened was, the revolving loan fund committee was created.
Yeah,
And both committees existed for a while with largely the same people on both of them. And once the Economic Development Committee helped us with that chapter of the new town plan and helped sort of get the ball rolling on that front, they basically are on hiatus, and they're letting the revolving loan fund committee be the active committee now.
okay, I didn't see the revolving loan fund committee listed as committees and commissions in town. Maybe it's there and I just
They are,
skimmed
yeah.
over it.
Because I noticed the same thing. In fact, our contractor subcommittee is meeting tomorrow, and you needed a room, and the Economic Development Committee was in the only available room, and I'm like, I don't think they're meeting anymore. So I called one of them, and they said, oh, yeah, the Revolving Loan Fund Committee has taken over all that work, and the Economic Development Committee is not meeting anymore.
It hasn't been moved over to the category of commissions and
Inactive.
committees that are inactive.
No, it
So
hasn't.
it's just maybe the
I think that's
The
just
website-
this is a website
the
issue.
webmaster has not caught up with the reality of the committees.
Yeah, so if you look on the website, John, under active town committees, there's a revolving loan fund committee
So
there.
there is, okay.
And they've got more recent,
Meeting minutes and,
if I can get down far enough here. No,
well, you've hit the bottom.
yeah, they do have their minutes and agenda.
And 2 open seats,
Yeah.
okay. It seemed like they might
Have some
join
ideas.
us, have some ideas, plus we're trying to develop incentives to bring jobs to town. I mean, they're trying to bring jobs to town.
Yep,
Seems like there's some mutual help we could give each other. So get on their case.
okay. Any other ideas for projects to sink teeth into and allocate money toward?
I just wanna make sure that you are reserving a buffer of money for, pizzas and, you know, our summer road trip.
I think that we generally pull that out of, one or two.
Tick removal devices for.
Yes, and we have one or two line items that tend to fund those things, and
All
they,
right.
they don't tend to be too expensive, so
Just checking.
We
that
got
will,
one on here we
that'll
can
be
check
covered.
off as done. 3-phase power.
Right? Hooray!
3-phase power.
It's not done
Yeah.
yet, I'll tell you, it's not.
It's down there though, right? You just have it hooked up.
No, it's not just us, it's not 100%
You
go
can't check it
or,
off yet.
it's very close, I guess. It's a huge
I'm gonna check
project.
out one.
It's good, it's all good, Dennis, but it's still, I think, got some bugs in it.
Okay, well, hearing no other ideas, I'm gonna run with the ones that I have and the ones that I heard, and I'll, put together the proposal for the select board. It'll be December something or other, one of their December meetings that I present it to them, so
Tell them
I'll
to get a park
let you know.
built.
What's that?
Tell them to get a park built on lot 1.
You got a couple people in this room working on that? Yep. But that's a good point, actually, from a budgetary standpoint.
Park what?
We had talked
a
about,
park
Maggie
built.
and I had talked
Built.
about
Got it.
approaching the select board about a small amount of funds for this next fiscal year
Good idea.
to maybe be able to at least plant a few trees once we come up with
Nice.
a reasonable plan for the park. And since the fiscal year goes from July 1 of 2020 to June 30th of 2021, that's it's 18 months away, so that might be a really good idea, is to put some money in for that. I don't know that the planning budget is the right place for that money. It seems like more of a public works kind of thing, but we can advocate for that.
Can we suggest that it be added to the public works
We
budget?
sure can,
Yeah.
yeah.
Good idea.
All right then. So you've got enough
Yep,
on your plate?
And we're meeting next week.
correct, because we will
The 30th.
we will at least finish this, and hopefully start talking about some design standards that Rolf and Maggie and I have been
Yeah.
working on.
So we're meeting next week, and then the next meeting after that is November.
21st,
You said,
I
I'm sorry
believe.
to ask.
Yes,
I
21st.
think it's 21st, it's a Thursday.
Yeah, it's a Thursday rather than our normal Wednesday.
30th.
Yeah. Oh, so it isn't a Thursday, it's a Wednesday, yes, there you go.
It's a Thursday, November 21st.
Yep. And then December 11th is what I have,
Correct.
December 11th.
which, yep, is a Wednesday.
That's your regular meeting time.
And that's it till the end of the year, right?
Right. No second meeting in December.
So that, no meeting on November 13th. That's.
Nope, the
Correct.
11th.
Both November meetings have been rescheduled, one to next week and the other to the 21st.
Yep, okay.
All right then. Minutes. I'm sure everyone has read them very, very carefully. I did before coming here to remind myself of what the heck we talked about last time. And I have no changes to propose. Does anyone have changes to propose to the minutes?
Not me.
Okay. Punctuation, inflammatory statements, anything? Okay, motion,
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as written.
second? All in favor?
Aye.
I abstain.
Alrighty then. Other business.
The only correspondence I got after your agenda went out was a notice from the town of Moncton that their planning commission will hold a hearing on the 21st, unfortunately the same night as your meeting, but probably you're not going to go to this one, so it doesn't matter. And what's the purpose of this? It is, they have a new town plan, or town plan revisions. So if you're interested, I have a hard copy, and you're welcome to grab it.
So they actually mail you a hard copy?
Yes. I'm looking to see if
With a
they,
graphic of mountains,
yes,
silhouettes of mountains
Fun
and
to know
fields.
when you get these notices from these other towns. And if you're interested, come on over. If the whole planning commission went to one of these
Wouldn't it be funny?
and
It's like,
just sort of
That would-
applauded. Go, you guys.
That would be fun to do.
they say they have
Brought
it
a
on
cake.
their, website as
Bring
well.
some food.
Yeah.
does
Like
anyone,
this, pretty much like this.
all right, does anyone else have any other business? Correspondence? Complaints? If you complain, you don't get whatever, a piece of whatever Joe's brought, but you can still complain. Okay, nothing? That's it, people. We're done.